Barbara. Okay, now I can introduce Troy. Okay, ladies, for those of you who do not know Troy,
I forgot. Yes,
Troy Pearse, he has been fishing since the day he was born, literally. And he knows about anatomy, about the bugs. He even invented the bogometer. If you guys don't know what the bogometer is, I highly suggest you figure that out. You find out how that works. It's really an awesome tool. And he's going to give us a talk and a presentation on tailwaters, how to fish tailwaters, how to read the water, what kind of bugs, I guess, and where the trout's habitat in these tailwaters. So literally where to find your fish when you're fishing tailwaters. So with that said, let's all welcome Troy. Thank you, Troy, for your time and effort joining our club.
Thanks for the introduction. Let me work on sharing my screen here and see if that comes across. So we should have a screen up that says fishing tailwaters. Is that coming across, ladies?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so far so good then. Let's go ahead and get started. So as Barbara said, I've been fishing in Idaho for a long time. I like to say I've been fishing since the day I was born because my mom went into labor while she was fishing. So um, fishing certainly was something in my life that was important, and my mom was a big influence. I'm a retired HP software engineer, worked with Connie some. So you'll see a lot of graphs and numbers in this. That's just my nature. Don't let it overwhelm you. Ask questions as we go if something doesn't make sense, because the graphs are there to try to make sense, not to confuse you. I've been a member of Boise Valley Fly Fishers for 15 plus years. And I'm currently the conservation director there. Um, and I guess I want to take this brief moment to say thanks to the Women's Fly Fishing Club for their great support of many things we do. That you girls show up and help at Expo. You've been great at participating in our programs from Fill the Net and our river cleanups. So I really appreciate all you've done to help us on the conservation front. Thank you. Also been a member of TU, although I have not been as involved in TU. As Barbara mentioned, I like bugs. It's just something I've always been interested in as far as fishing. And I did a survey way back in 2010 on bug size that turned into this article called Size Matters, and ended up turning into the Bugometer. If you're interested in more on Match the Hatch, I can send you a copy of that article. I'd be glad to share it. It's nothing earth shattering really, but you'll see some of those concepts here. Although this is not a bug seminar per se, I can't help myself but have pictures of bugs. Things we're going to talk about. So to be honest, this really started about the last bullet, talking about tailwater or trout habitat challenges we have in our rivers around here and what BVFF is doing to improve them. I thought that made for a fairly boring presentation, so I added this content above it about what are our tailwaters, how to fish them, what the opportunities are, and that type of stuff. So to make it a little bit more well-rounded. But I'll also be talking about some of the things that BVFF is doing to help improve our local tailwaters. As we go, if you have questions, put up a hand, toss something in the chat room, wave your hands on the screen, and because we want to talk about it as it comes up. So don't feel shy. Please ask questions. I can't see the audience very well, so I can't read body language to see that somebody's got a question. So please make your questions known. We really want to talk about it as we go. So when we say tailwaters, there's these categories of rivers. There's what we call freestones, and they flow from the mountains. You know, they're steep rivers that come out of snowpack. Um, and they come up in the spring when the snow runs off, and they recede in the summer when the snow is gone. They can have a lot of changes in water temperature. Some examples around here with Big Wood River is a perfect example of of a freestone. Um, the upper part of some of our local rivers, like the Middle Fork of the Boise, is also a freestone that then turns into a tailwater. Others might be the Middle Fork of the Salmon or the Locksaw. These are all freestone rivers that butt up into the mountains. Um, Tailwaters, instead of flowing from mountains, they actually flow from the bottom of a dam. And it's what we're going to focus on today. The way the water comes out of them depends on management for flood control and irrigation. And they can be slapped into the countryside anywhere, so they could be fairly steep, like the South Fork of the Boise has pretty good gradient, or they could be flat, like the Owyhee has very little gradient, right? Gradient meaning how steep is something, what's the gradient? There's also spring creeks. We're not going to talk about them, but they're a good comparison. Silver Creek is a spring creek. It flows from the ground, has constant temperatures. They got a lot of bugs because of that. And because they flow from springs underneath the ground, they tend to be a lot lower gradient, a lot slower flow, right? Then you've got some rivers that are kind of hybrids, like Henry's Fork. It starts with a tailwater coming out of a reservoir that's joined by rivers that then have spring creeks that come up, and so it's kind of a crossover. So not any river is just one thing usually. Although freestones like, the Middle Fork and the Main Salmon are some of the longest freestones in the lower 48. So we're going to focus on tailwaters today. Um, we've got a lot of dams in the Northwest. This is a look at the Columbia Basin, and the circled areas are the ones we're going to be talking about today over on the Owyhee, as well as the Boise drainage. Arrow Rock was built first in 1915, over 100 years ago. Um, and it's interesting to note that they say the dam was only designed for 50 years, and when it turned 100, they were really proud of the fact they had made it to 100. And here we are coming on 10 years after that. And the part of the point there is all dams kind of have a lifespan, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen to them as they age, right? Owyhee was built after that, Anderson Ranch, then Lucky Peak. One of the things that we in Boise drainage are lucky is that recreation actually is incorporated into the operation of that dam. Many dams are just there for flood control and irrigation and maybe power generation. Very few call out recreation, and the Boise River dams also list recreation. Fish and Game actually owns some water to keep those rivers flowing during the winter, and that's a really important part of our river systems is what we can do with water in the winter. And I'll talk more about that. So the big thing that they were put in place is flood control, right? They catch the runoff to prevent flooding. If anybody was here around Snowmageddon, less than 10 years ago, we had, this is a graph that shows the orange line is how much water came through town, with 7,000 CFS being flood stage, really bank full. And you can see we got over that. We hit upwards of 9,000 CFS for a while in the early June timeframe. The blue line is if I took all the water that was coming down the Middle Fork and the North Fork and Roby Creek and added them up. And you can see how much water we would have been sitting in town here had the dams not been there to catch that runoff. So flood control is a really important part of it. Another thing to realize, though, that what flows we experience below those dams somewhat depends on how much water was carried over in the reservoirs above. If we have a lot of water in the reservoirs, like we did this last year, then they have to dump that water to catch the runoff if it's a lot. And so we had high flows this spring, right? Versus if the reservoirs have low carryover, they can absorb all of that runoff without running high water below them. And it's a fairly common thing. You know, if I look at here's below the Owyhee River, um, the top one shows you can see these spikes of how often we have high water that comes down the river. It's been a little while. 2019 was the last time, but if we look above the reservoir at Rome, which is a gauge upstream, you know, you see spikes almost every year. So this is just a reminder that dams are there for flood control. If we didn't have them, we would flood more regularly, but it also changes the flows and how we fish them below those reservoirs. And those things create some opportunities. In 2022, we didn't have a good carryover in the Boise River system, and they were worried about not enough snowpack and having irrigation water, and so they budgeted their water, and that turned into a boon for us fishermen and fisher ladies because lower flows makes it easier for us to fish. So on the South Fork of the Boise, this graph on the top shows a typical summer flow is 1,600 to 1,800 CFS, and you can't wade it by any stretch of the imagination. You can boat it, but it's pretty fast, and it ran around 1,200 all summer. Well, that was boatable, and it didn't come up. It was if you look at the dates on there, the river stayed below 600 CFS well in through the end of June, um, and so you could actually go wade the river that year. And most rivers, most of the time, you cannot wade the South Fork of the Boise on opener. The lower water flows meant we had warmer temperatures, and so if you can recognize some of those patterns, you can find better fishing. The lower Boise River in town, same type of thing. So these are hydrographs. They come from the USGS is where I'm pulling these. These little triangles that are on the screen. Does my cursor come across at all? Yes, no, anybody? So these triangles that are on the bottom graph, those are the average flows on those days over all historical time frame. So when you look at a hydrograph, it tells you what's the flow normally like on that day, right? So you can see the Boise in town often, usually jumps up above 1,000 CFS and stays there all summer. And we had a very low spring for runoff. It jumped up for a little while, then dropped down below that. And so we had great fishing in April and May on the Boise in town in 2022 because the reservoirs were buffering all that runoff, right? And then it was low enough that if you knew how to wade and where to wade, you could wade the river all summer, right? So understanding how these reservoirs work can key you into some good fishing opportunities. A great example would be last year, while the Boise in town was near flood stage, the Owyhee was not. They had just as much snow as we did, but they didn't have the carryover. So the reservoirs buffered all that water and you could fish below the dam, right? So those are some examples of how different conditions can give you opportunities in certain years that you want to take advantage of. This opportunity on the South Fork of the Boise only comes around to like once every 10 years. Can you wade at opening season through June? So it's something you want to watch for and definitely take advantage of. Questions on any of this? I appreciate you're on mute, but if you have questions, please speak up or toss them in chat.
I'm watching chat, nothing yet.
Thank you. So I've been talking a little bit about this buffering. This is an advantage for us in the springtime. This is a graph of the South Fork of the Boise. The blue line is coming out below Anderson Ranch Dam, and the orange line is the flows coming into Anderson Ranch Dam at Pine area. And you can see as we come into March that the natural flow is jumping up, but the Anderson Ranch outflows are staying the same. So this buffering during that March timeframe means that we can go fish below the reservoir and have clean, clear water that's not influenced by snowmelt, right? And that pre-runoff can be some of the best fishing of the year. You still have to watch out. I mean, the picture below shows Danskin Creek is blown out, so there's mud coming in there. So you still have to be careful of it. But if it wasn't for that, the whole river would look that way, right? So buffering that runoff, that pre-season runoff, is a real great advantage of fishing below a tailwater. So if we look at some tailwaters, this is some information on the Owyhee. It's what, about an hour and a half drive from here below Lake Owyhee. I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of access there is, as well as some of the ways the river works. One of the nice things about the Owyhee is it's open year round. It's catch and release for brown trout. You can keep some rainbows if you wish, because they're planted. The browns are all wild. You got to have an Oregon license. You can get guided over there if you want, whereas there are some rivers around here you cannot be guided. In the winter, it's very low on flows this time of year. We got a lot of ice. It's just solid ice over there, I'm sure, right now. Although there's wild browns over there, there's limited spawning habitat. There's not a lot of places they can spawn. There's no good tributaries that come in that they can swim up to spawn or that will bring in new gravel. But they've got about upwards of 15 miles of fishable water with good road access along it. The top part gets the most fishing access because it has the highest fish densities right now. The lower reaches have great potential in history. They've had just as good a fishing or fish numbers as the top, but right now that population's not as good. If we look at how the water flows, here it is coming out of the dam itself. All these dams are managed for irrigation. There is a stream gauge that's within a mile or so of the reservoir dam that you can find on USGS as well as Bureau of Reclamation's Hydromet. The winter right now, flows get shut down quite a bit. I mean, they're running 20 to 40 CFS depending on the year. But if you remember right, those orange triangles tell us the average over time. And you can see that many years, those flows are much lower than they are. Back when I first started fishing the Owyhee in the 90s, they would turn the dam off and it would leak 5 CFS, right? It does not get a lot of winter flows, just enough to keep the fish alive, really. That's about it. They do get high water occasionally, but not as frequently as they used to. They certainly need a flush of all the sediment that they've got right now. One thing that's interesting about the way the Owyhee runs, you can see this water coming out of the dam. It's about 80 feet off the bottom, and that's a turbine they retrofitted into the dam for power generation, and that can cause some warmer water to get pulled in if I get real low water levels, right? It's really easy to wade. Comparatively, it's very bouldery. You do want to take a wading staff. It's easy to run into boulders while you're wading, but normal summer flows are 200-ish CFS. You can wade around it just about anywhere. Of course, there are deep spots you can't cross, but it's very easy to float. It's not a good. It's a very easy to wade. It's not a good river to float. It's so small and narrow that any float craft going through is going to disturb other fishermen's water. So it's not a river that's recommended to float in any kind of craft. You'll see some people sometimes throw a float tube in and paddle across a deep pool. That's okay. You're not floating down through somebody else's water there. So that's okay. Any questions on that part? Some of the bugs there, it's a really productive river. It's lower gradient. Remember, that means not as steep. It runs slow. And certain bugs like different kinds of fast versus slow habitat, and midges and mayflies really like slower rivers. So there's a lot of mayflies in the Owyhee. There's also a lot of midges. They've got a famous Squala hatch, but it's really confined to a few very small reaches of the river where there's riffles. Um, um, Depending on the river cycles, when they get a blowout, the stonefly and the caddis will end up getting better habitat that kind of fills in and degrades over time, as sediments accumulate, and then you'll get more slow water bugs like calabatus. So it kind of ebbs and flows that way. These are examples of PMDs in the photos, blueing olives in the upper right, squala stoneflies in the lower left, and a little yellow Sally stonefly that's there all summer. That sometimes they'll have those red abdomens or butts on them, like shown there. So those are some of the more common hatches. What you're seeing here is the first of what's called a hatch chart, and this one I pulled off a TRR's website, and they have them available. They help you understand what hatches are going to happen on a river and what's the general time frame. So you might look at the top line and it says bluing olives are predominant in March, April, May, and then they kind of fade out and then they come back in the fall, October, November, December. So that's how to read those lines. It gives you an idea of what time frame to expect different kinds of bugs. Not when they're going to hatch during the day, but at least, if you go to the river in the summer in July and June and July, you're likely to see, scanning down the bars here, you're likely to find pale morning duns, maybe some calabatus, some caddis, some little yellow sallies, etc. So that's how you read those. They're a really good tool. And the little plastic cards the bugs are sit on there, those are what we refer to as those bugometers. They have a sizing chart that helps you choose the size. If we switch over to the Boise River, we've got a lot of great Boise rivers here in the Boise. Some of them start as freestones, meaning they flow out of the mountains. North Fork, Middle Fork, and the South Fork of the Boise all flow out of the mountains until they hit a reservoir. The South Fork of the Boise flows into Anderson Ranch. The Middle Fork flows into Arrow Rock, which then percolates into Lucky Peak and then comes out to be the lower Boise that flows out in town here. So those we'll be talking about the tailwater sections of those. The Fish and Game does stock the Boise River system, and there are some wild and some native. When I say that, some trout like wild and like browns and rainbows are wild in our Boise River system, but they're not native. They're not indigenous to this area. They've been stocked and have become self-reproducing. Others like red band trout and bull trout are actually wild and native, right? So the Fish and Game stocks the Boise in town, the North, Middle, and Upper South Fork. This table here on the right kind of shows you how many fish annually get dumped in to the river. And I think I have a bigger map on the next page. The lower Boise in town here has a pretty good self-sustaining population of trout, both wild rainbows and brown. There's more rainbows than browns. In general, at Park Center, that stretch has got a little bit different regs. It's managed for wild trout. And then as you get closer to the reservoir, you'll see the upper stretch from Barber upstream didn't receive any trout at all this year, which is common. They don't stock it. It's mostly wild. South Fork of the Boise, below Anderson Ranch, hasn't been stocked since the early 80s. So all those are wild rainbow trout. And again, there's some native and bull trout that are scattered throughout mostly the freestone sections of the rivers, but there are some in the tailwaters. It can be a little confusing what fishing regs are where. Fish and Game has a great tool called their fishing planner, where you can put in a waterway and it will tell you about it. It'll tell you what species are there. It'll give you the fishing regs. It will also bring up if they've been recently stocked. So it's a great tool if you want to take kids out fishing and are trying to find some place they've thrown some stockers in, or if you're like me, places that have recently been stocked and you want to avoid because they might have a bunch of people. But the Fish and Game sets different regs based on the experience they're trying to provide. So if it's heavily stocked, then it's just going to be general regs, which means you can keep fish, and there's no size limits. If they want you to catch bigger fish or more quality fish, they'll change the bag and size limits, which is what they've done on the Park Center area. They've made it a quality trout fishery. Similar, the Middle Fork of Boise, as you go up further upstream, it's managed for quality trout. And so there's some limits. And I'm sorry, I thought I had a map that was more in detail. It's either further on or I forgot to add it. So I'm sorry. South Fork of the Boise, for example, is managed for what they call wild trophy trout. And which means that you have to release every trout under 20 inches because they're trying to make that a high quality, high sized fish, right? As well as they close it for spawning because they want the fish to have the ability to reproduce without being targeted, right? So that there's different regs when you go in this system. Um, oh, I remember it. Yeah, the maps will be after each river. So this is a little bit about individual rivers. The South Fork of the Boise um, is about an hour and a half from town, right outside of Mountain Home. It's a trophy trout, wild rainbow. It's closed from April 1st through Memorial Day. Um, it has good habitat for spawning and rearing. It's got some side channels. There's great access in the first 10 miles. You go down into the canyon and it gets harder. There's whitewater that needs pretty advanced skills, and there's no access in that lower section. I think, a better map. Yes. Here's a little bit better map that shows Anderson Ranch Reservoir and where some of the ramps are in the upper 10 miles. There's the tailwaters that's a few miles from the dam that BVFF helped put in 2004. Unfortunately, right now it's not used as much because of the rapids that formed below there during the fires and blowouts. There's the village. There's Indian Rock, which is a rough area but easy to put in or take out. Cow Creek, and then Danskin, and then way down 16 miles below that is Neil Bridge. So there's a number of places that you can put in and take out and float on the South Fork of the Boise. If you're interested in floating the South Fork of the Boise, you should get some river guidance because there are some rapids scattered throughout. It's not hard, but it's not easy either. Flows out of the South Fork are managed for irrigation, right? And they follow a pretty typical up and down schedule. Again, the orange yellowish line shows you how they normally flow. This is 2016. They come up in April 1st. They run around 1,800 during the summer. They drop towards the end of August down to 600 and then down to 300 for the winter. Pretty standard every year. Um, you really want to avoid wading the river if it's over 600 CFS. 300 CFS is pretty easy wading. 600, it can be challenging in places. Somebody dies every couple of years because they think they're going to wade the river when it's up at summer flows. So you don't want to wade it in the summer. Um, some of the hatches there. It's a steeper gradient, so it's got faster water species of mayflies, such as pink alberts. It does have a good blueing olive and midge hatch, lots of caddis. They do have some stoneflies, not a huge number, but enough to get the fish up. Mostly in the lower sections of the river. The upper section stays so cold, they don't have a great stonefly hatch up close to the dam. And then they have a lot of terrestrials like grasshoppers and cicadas. In the bug photos here on the upper right is shown a golden stone. Um, Next to the hatch chart, there's a salmon fly. Below that, you can see a midge and its case just emerging. Next to that, a blueing olive, and above that are a couple of different cicadas, which are depending on the year, they can be these darker, smaller ones, or every now and then we get this gigantic one, which this one came from 2014. I haven't seen that bug since, but they like come out every 7 to 17 years. Um, so those are some of the hatches that you'll run in and bugs you'll run in onto the Boise South Fork. In town, the South Fork, the Boise in town, the fishing game likes to call it one of the finest urban trout rivers in the country, and I have to agree with them there. We've got great water quality down through at least Star. The more city influence, the more agriculture influence it gets, the worse the water quality gets and the warmer it gets. One thing that's nice about the Boise in town, as well as the South Fork, is it's ice free all winter compared to the Owyhee,
Hi,
which is
Nora.
hi. Uh, it's an urbanized river, meaning it runs through town. We'll talk a little bit about that in the challenges. There's not a lot of spawning habitat because it's below a dam and it washes away the gravels. But there's great access. We can get to the Boise River through the parks and the Greenbelt system. It is floatable. There's a section that's manicured for floaters. Outside of that, you've got to be cautious. There are down trees frequently. Bren has a good water trail guidebook that you can get that'll help you understand where to get in and out if you want to take a canoe or other craft. But those spots aren't cleared and they often have down trees. So you need to be a little bit more of an advanced floater if you're going to float outside that zone. There's a couple of rainbow and brown trout, and we've got a lot of quality fish in the Boise River to be proud of. And then this urban quality trout area is up at Park Center. They've got a good wild trout population there. And so BVFF and Trout Unlimited work together with others to get the fishing rules to put a size limit there of 14 inches to try and help improve the fishing experience in that section. This is kind of a map of the Boise River. Where the pins are dropped are some of your access points. On the far downstream, you've got the Star River Walk, which is fairly new. You've got Eagle Island State Park, which you can get to the north and the south channel at that spot. You've got Reed Merrill Park in Meridian, or excuse me, in the Eagle area. Westmoreland Park is in Garden City. Willow Lane has actually got a ramp that BBFF helped put in 2016. Veterans Park and Morrison to all the way up to Barber is the official tuber zone. Um, and but there's some great fishing along that stretch if you go out before in the mornings before the tubers get on the river, or if you wait until fall or spring are my favorite times to fish those. And then the latest park is Diane Moore Nature Center, which is a couple of miles below Lucky Peak. BVFF worked on a fisherman access there in last year, and we're really impressed with that section of the river. So we'll talk about it more in a few minutes. Flows on the river are managed for irrigation. Here's an irrigation dam, that you've got to be careful if you're floating in the lower river. And my dog Maggie loves to go swimming below them. We do get high water frequently, which keeps it flushed out, and it just means some years you've got to be careful in the spring. Usually we run around 1,000 CFS. But again, I prefer to fish it in the spring and the fall when the flows are below 800, more in the 600 range. In the winter, it typically runs around 250, and that's very fishable. The fishing game has been working to try and increase the minimum water flows to 300 CFS, which would be awesome because it would extend the reach of the water into the side channels and give us better access to spawning and rearing habitat. So I'm hoping they can get that done. And if they come out with that, that's something we need to help support them on. Some of the hatches, there's no hatch chart for the Boise in town. It's not a great dry fly river. There's a lot of bugs, but not enough usually to get fish to the surface. That being said, if you want to catch a fish on a dry fly, you can. There are a lot of ants. There are several different hatches from caddis to pale morning duns, October caddis that you can go target at the right time of year. And maybe blueing olives, I would say, is probably the most reliable time to find fish at the surface, but in general, it's a nymphing game. Streamers also work well. Something that is really tied into how reservoirs work is understanding water temperatures below reservoirs as well as your freestones. Trout are cold-blooded creatures, and so how much they want to eat, how far they'll move to take your fly, what kind of water they're sitting in, all depends on their metabolism. If it gets cold, they don't have the energy to be in the fast water. Versus in the summer when it's warmer, they can be up in the riffles feeding anywhere. So by understanding the water temperature, it'll help you as a fisher person to target the right water types. Right now, water temperatures have dropped below 40. So the fish, to trout particularly, have dropped back into slow holding water pools, deeper runs where they can get out of the faster current and not use a lot of energy. So right now, when you go to the river, you want to fish deeper, slower water. You don't want to go up and fish the riffles or the runs, fast water stuff. And then bugs, as it turns out, also have preferred water temperatures. And if you understand those a little bit, you can kind of find when and where bugs are going to hatch. So if we look at rainbows, they turn into teenagers eating all the time when the water temperatures hit 50. So anytime I can, I like to look for 50-degree water because I'd rather have a fish that wants to eat all the time versus one that just eats once a day. So 50 to 65 is kind of their high metabolism range. You start getting above that 65, and they don't eat really well, and their metabolism rates, excuse me, their mortality rate goes down if they get exposed to stress. So it's good to let them be once they gets too warm. So water temperature is one of those things that reservoirs are great because below a reservoir, it helps keep the water cooler as a general rule. And we'll talk about how to use that to our advantage. So on any body of water, there's something called solar accumulation, which is the longer you have sun on the water, the more radiation it accumulates, the more it warms up. So it's like the cup of water in the microwave, the longer the microwave's on, the warmer it gets. So this time of year, we've been coming off of our winter solstice. The sun is really low and it's not heating the water very well. As that angle of the sun comes up and warms the water more, you're going to start seeing more warming, and that'll start warming the water up. And if you go downstream, you get cumulative amount of solar, so you can find warmer water. And if you want less solar accumulation, such as the summer, you can go upstream to find cooler water. So going upstream and downstream helps you find water temperatures that are better to fish, right? Um, and whereas you have a lot of fluctuations on freestones, tailwaters below dams, they stay the same outflow temperature all day. Anderson Ranch, Lucky Peak, they all put out the same temperature all day long. They're going to change over the season, but they don't change during the day so much, right? That can help you at certain times of the year and it can hurt you at others. Let's look at some examples. Um, One thing on the water solar accumulation point would be that on a river, it's not in April on the south where the Boise, it wouldn't be uncommon if you went downstream 10 miles to find water by the end of the day that's 10 degrees warmer. So you could fish up at 39-degree water at the top of the reservoir by the dam, or you could fish up to 49-degree water if you went downstream below dam skin. And that's the difference between a fish that's not hungry and doesn't want to eat and a fish that is interested in eating. So that solar accumulation can make a big difference. Let's look at some examples. Um, so this chart on the right, I promised you graphs. Here's another one. Are they all asleep yet? No, no, just Barbara. Oh, okay, Barbara. I'm just making fun. You were
I'm
yawning.
awake. Oh no,
Uh,
actually I was scratching my lip.
okay. So this graph, the orange line shows what temperatures coming out of Anderson on average during the day. And you can see there's tiny, tiny increases from June all the way through the end of July. It starts around, 47 and it finally gets around 54, right? All summer. If you look at the water flowing into it, which is at Featherville, water temperatures are varying from 50 to 55. And then by the end of the summer, they're going from 55 to 75, right? Where 75 is probably warmer than is good for the fish to be in, right? So if you were to fish Anderson Ranch early in the season and you fish close to the dam, it can be too cold. But if you go there in the winter, in let's say December, it can be an advantage. So you got to understand those things can help you or hurt you, right? Um, there are some dams that spill over the top, like Cascade. If you floated the Cabarton, it's bathtubs water in the summer. And then power turbines might pull in water as well from higher elevations, and something called reservoir drawdowns can change it as well. And I'll show you some examples of those. Um, so
Troy, a question.
yes,
How the frigid weather that we've been having, does that have an impact on the temperature along the tailwater?
Yeah, it does, and this next graph kind of talks to it to some degree, and it depends on the dam construction. So we'll compare a couple of dams here. Scarlett, if you give a dam, okay. So this graph, the blue line shows the water coming out from Anderson Ranch Reservoir, and you can see it slowly cools all the way through December. The red box is kind of a hot spot for blueing olives to hatch. They like it 45 to 55. So you can see if you were up at Featherville, the hatches are going to die out by the end of October. But below Anderson Ranch Dam, those hatches will continue well into December. In fact, I found blueing olive hatches pretty reliable down there through mid-December, right? Now, if you have a really cold snap like right now, right? And we could jump on USGS and look at this question if we want to do it live. The flows coming out of Anderson Ranch Dam, especially when it's got a lot of water, which right now it's only down 20 feet, they're going to be the same, whether it's 20 below, 20 above, 40 above, doesn't matter, because it's got this big insulated blanket. It takes a long time to cool that off, right? So it doesn't change very much. Now, the cooling effect on the river below it means that it's going to cool off rapidly below that, right? So as you get further downstream, it's going to get colder and colder and colder. But you could go up to Anderson Ranch Dam right now, and water temperatures, I bet, are 40 degrees. Let's take a look. I don't know if this will come across. Let me reshare. It's an interesting question to look at. Let's see if I can share my screen and we'll just look at it. Share. All right. Karen, is my screen coming across?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so this is Boise Valley Fly Fishers webpage, and one of the pages that's really handy is under our local waters. If I click on local waters, it shows different rivers, and it gives me the ability to click and find out its discharge or the water temperature. A lot of these water temperature sites are scattered between the USGS, NOAA, Bureau of Reclamation, and they can be very difficult to find. We've kind of made a one-stop shop for us here, right? So on the South Fork of the Boise, we're going to look at this exact question. Here is below Anderson Ranch Dam. Okay. And then I can get this down a little bit. Here is Neal Bridge, which is 26 miles downstream. Okay. So below Anderson Ranch Dam, this is about a mile below the dam. Okay. So it's got some time for cooling. It is not the actual outflow temperatures, but we can still see right now water temperatures are riding around 40 to 41 degrees. Amazing, right? Even though it's friggin' cold out there, right? If we go downstream, Neal Bridge, 26 miles downstream, water temperatures, let's pull up water temperatures. Water temperatures are running 33 degrees, right? If we could do this on the Boise River and compare the Boise River gauge at Glenwood versus all the way down at Caldwell, for example, and you'd see some differences. But the reservoir is putting out fairly warm water. You know, this makes it look like it's putting maybe 42-degree water out or something like that right now. And that's because there's this big blanket of warm water. So you could go fish the first couple of miles of the South Fork of the Boise. Right now, it would be ice-free, and you'd probably find fish. You might find a blueing olive hatch. Oh, no, excuse me. You might find a midge hatch. Probably a little cool for blueing olives. So, but that's a great example of how tailwaters are protecting the outflow of that water temperature versus further downstream, it's almost frozen. If I was to go upstream of the water coming in at Featherville, so we're going to say the upper South Fork at Featherville, that one's a Bureau of Reclamation hydromet. And again, water temperatures are running 33 degrees. It's cold up there. It's ice, right? So those are some real-time examples of water temperatures happening right now. Did that give you a better feeling for it, Karen?
Yeah, that's amazing and very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump ahead and use the Boise in town as an example. It's constructed differently. Um, and Lower Boise River. And you can see this cool off has taken water temperatures from 38, 39 and dropped them down in that 33-degree range. Now this is down, right, 10 miles downstream or whatever Glenwood is downstream. The reservoir itself is probably putting out a little bit warmer than that, but it's cooling through town, right? And we'll talk a little bit about why that's that way. If we were to look at the Owyhee, the lower Owyhee, here again, it was running around 39. It's down around 37. So water's coming out of that reservoir. It's got a deep blanket of water like the South Fork does. And then it's cooling, right? And it's going to cool a little bit faster because it's less gradient. So water doesn't move very fast. So it cools off faster, right? Both the gauges are maybe a mile downstream, right? So those are some real-time examples. Other questions to follow up on that? Okay, we'll jump back to presentations. The presentation show back up? Okay. So we talked about that extended hatch window. So you can find hatches on the South Fork of the Boise in November, December, whereas freestones, they're gone, right? And then in the spring, though, if you were to try to fish up close to the dam, the reservoir is going to run 40 degrees in March regardless. In fact, it doesn't warm up above 45 we saw in June, right? So it stays cold. So it's got this delayed warming cycle and or delayed cooling cycle, then a delayed warming cycle. So when you fish the South Fork of the Boise or any tailwater in March, April timeframe, you'd like to get away from the dam and allow some solar radiation to warm that thing up. So Neil Bridge was that spot where we showed 26 miles downstream, Karen, it was really cold. Well, you can see, so the orange line is the high temperature of the day and the gray is the low temperature of the day. And you can see how much it's warming up coming into March. And that means we're finding hatches down there versus when you're below 40 degrees, you don't have much of a hatch. So up close to the dam, if you went and fished, you probably wouldn't find as good a fishing. So there's a great example of how the water temperature offsets can help you or hurt you. And it's a real common thing. I find I go fishing with guys in November, December up at the Anderson Ranch. We fish really good and we go back in spring. And where do they want to go? The last place they caught fish up to the dam. And I'm like, guys, it's too cold up there, but that was so warm in the fall. Why don't we go to there now? Oh, it's not warm now. So it's just one of those almost counterintuitive fisherman things. One of the tailwater challenges that dams provide is we've been talking about this depth of water protecting the outflows, and that's really great for most of the years. It gives us cool outflows. So here's an example of the Owyhee Reservoir when it's full. Water temperatures come out of that reservoir 47 to, what is this? 47 to 52, right? 48 to 52 degrees is pretty much a normal summer temperature regiment. But when that reservoir drops, like it did in 2013, 14, and 15, and the surface of the water gets close to that power outlet, all of a sudden it starts sucking in warm water. And water temperatures those years coming out of the reservoirs at that same spot, the outflows were up to 60, and that water gauge a mile down was getting up to the 70s. If you go downstream 10 miles, it was over 80 degrees. And so there was a significant fish kill that happened in those years from that extended drought. So that's just an example of how the tailwaters can help you or hurt you. BVFF has been working with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Reclamation, and the irrigation district to try to prevent that fish kill from happening again. The river, to be honest, still hasn't recovered from it, but they have the ability to change over and let water out the bottom outlet works spot there, which is what they do in the winter. but they don't get power generation. So hopefully we don't run into that again. But once every 20 years or so we do. So we'll have to be vigilant and try to prevent it next time. Boise River in town, we get what's called a drawdown effect. There's 3 reservoirs, and they manage it so that the Lucky Peak gets drawn down to a certain level every year. Let's see, do I show that? Yeah. So this is how the water gets drawn down in every year. And on low water years, it can get drawn down early and down so low that it sucks in warm water. It's kind of like the Owyhee thing we showed. And so there are times, so right now in Karen's question, the Boise River, because the reservoir level is down below the top of the trash rack or where water starts getting sucked in, and it doesn't have as deep of a blanket to protect it, it gets colder faster than the other reservoirs do. So it tends to run colder in the winter than the South Fork and the Owyhee do. And it can get warmer in the summer. Most of the time it doesn't. Here's an example of water temperatures. You can see in a normal summer it gets up to that 65-ish degree range of being cautious by the end of the summer, and then the summer's over. But the year we had drawdowns because of droughts, water temperatures were significantly warmer and got up into those ranges for most of August that year, and the river was too warm to fish. So it can be a problem for the Boise in town, although for most part, the tailwater has very good water temperatures. Okay, enough graphs for you. So what do we need? We're kind of into that challenges. What do we need for trout to survive and do well in rivers? One of them is one of the challenges is that reservoirs strip away spawning size gravels. So the way freestones work is when the river comes up, it's like a conveyor belt that transports smaller sediments downstream. And the more water there is, the bigger the sediment it can move. And it picks up these small gravels, 1/2 inch to inch size gravels, and it moves them downstream. Well, that's normally not a problem on a freestone because new stuff moves in behind it. It's just a constant new set of sediments that are moving down. On a tailwater like the Boise, Lucky Peak stops those new sediments from moving in, so we don't get new gravel. And over time, the river becomes denuded of smaller gravels, and we lose spawning capability in rivers like the Boise in town. That's why doing gravel augmentations can help so much. And the Boise River in town's got a problem with that. The Owyhee as well. The South Fork, not as much. They've got some side stream influences that are bringing in smaller gravels that help them. But all tailwaters have this loss of spawning gravels because of the new gravel getting caught upstream. Gravel augmentations have been shown to help this. Trout Unlimited has done some on the upper river around Park Center. When Fish and Game has measured the number of baby fish or trout fry in the river, those areas on this little heat map in the upper right corner show the bigger colored blobs show more baby fish. And those areas that had gravel augmentations also have more baby fish. BVFF has added gravel a couple of times in the Garden City stretch, and we're starting to see an increase in the spawning and fry in those areas there. So we're hopeful that we can increase the population in this section of the river by doing that. It's difficult regulation-wise, it's somewhat expensive, and the gravel goes away after a period of time and you have to add it back, right?
We have a question from Terry. Is there a way to supplement the gravel? I think you're kind of talking about that now.
Yeah, so yeah, there's the only real way is to get approval to put some in the rivers. The gravel we're getting right now largely is being recruited from banks. So when we get high water, I just go back and look at this brown trout red on the Boise River here on the lower right. You'd see that it's right next to a cobble bar. Well, when the river was high, it what we call recruit, or it pulled gravel out of the banks and then pulled it into the river and then brown trout were able to spawn in it, right? So we do still get some fresh gravel coming in the river that's being stripped out of islands. And then the rest of it, the only thing is the way it's getting it is from clubs like Trout Unlimited and Boise Valley Fly Fishers putting it in. It's getting harder and harder because of flood regulations. If you put something in the river, then you have to be able to prove mathematically, hydraulically, that you're not going to cause somebody else's property to flood, which we wouldn't want to do, right? So you have to pay for these models to show that your change to the river isn't going to cause damage to somebody else's property, so that if there is a flood in that property, you can say, hey, it wasn't us, right? It keeps getting to be more difficult and more expensive to do. BVFF has been working for a couple of years now on an augmentation on the Owyhee River. Did that answer your question? I want to make sure that I didn't.
Terry, you can unmute yourself if you want to comment or ask something more.
Okay, feel free to speak up if you want to talk about gravel augmentations more. We're getting ready to do one on the Owyhee. As we've worked and volunteered with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, we found that the majority of the spawning is in the first 5 miles of the river. And there's plenty of places that have the right to spawn. For a brown trout to spawn, he's got to have water that has the right depth, the right velocity, and the right bottom substrate. Those three things. And there are a lot of places that have the right bottom, have the right depth and the right flow, but they do not have the right bottom substrate. In other words, they don't have gravel. So if we add gravel, we think we can get fish spawning in these other places. So we've raised money, we've got some grants, we've been doing hydraulic modeling to try and add 100 cubic yards of gravel to the Owyhee River. We hope to do it this fall. And will be interesting to see how that helps recover the brown trout population on that lower section of the river that got damaged from the warm water that I talked about. And hopefully that'll help. Even if we have more issues, it'll help them recover faster. So fingers crossed that happens. We've got, I think, all of our ducks in the row. I'm still working on paperwork. I've been working on it for 3 years.
Right, there's
Another,
sorry.
yeah.
Why does Oregon Fish and Game not close the Owyhee during spawning?
That's a great question. The biggest reason is it's not a native species. It is a foreign, invasive, non-native trout species that doesn't deserve protection. If it was red bands or bull trout or a salmonid species, those might be treated differently. So that's the biggest reason. The second is they haven't shown that angling pressure is causing the decline in the population. There are other issues. It's not to say they couldn't close it if they think angling pressure was a major contributor, but they do not think it is. Okay. Other questions on the Owyhee? That's my interpretation from talking from ODFW. You could get a different answer if you asked them.
And by the way, since we're not inundated with questions, if you want to just unmute yourself when you have a question, feel free to do that.
Yeah, and I'd be glad to mute myself while I give you an answer. So we talk about urbanized uses. The Boise River, particularly through town, it runs through a town. Rivers, when they come up, they like to wander. They like to change course. You can see in this top right photo that the river cut into the green belt and got very close to coming into this neighborhood recently. So we have to do things to make sure that it stays in bank. That means that the flood district has to remove trees that are flood risks that would cause the river to jump banks. But it's also a challenge for fisheries management because the fish need to cover in order to survive. So it's one of those challenges to work with. We've been working with the Boise Flood District. They've been great partners in helping us move gravel into the river. Although they drive these huge excavators in the river in the winter, we've provided them with location maps of where brown trout reds areas are so they can avoid them. And they're working on their policies on how and where they can leave wood in the water and not be a danger to flood or to floaters. So we're trying to find win-win scenarios where we can leave wood in the water with them, and they're very good partners on that. A lot of people have a negative connotation of what they're doing, but this is an urbanized river. We have to manage it, but we also want to do it carefully, and they've been great partners in that. Any questions on that one? I know there's sometimes questions on the flood district stuff. We can come back to it if you want. So we talked about loss of wood, and the Boise River is starved for wood. It gets yanked out for floaters, it gets yanked out for flood damages, or just because people think it's trashy. But you know, side channels and areas that have wood have such a higher amount of trout fry. When we added wood to our side channel gravel augmentation, that's when we really started seeing bigger numbers of fish surviving over the winter and starting to see some 1 and 2 year old trout in those zones. And Fish and Game tells us that, you know, you can add all the gravel you want, but if those trout fry don't have protection, you're just feeding the birds, right? You're just feeding them fry. So you've got to provide them cover. So the photo on the lower right here is a tree that the flood district pinned for us between those upright 2 trees there. There's a root wad that's in the water. And when we electrofished that this fall with Fish and Game, we found quite a few trout fry, but which are usually in the 2-inch range, 2 to 3-inch range. And then we found quite a few of these 9-ish inch rainbow and brown trout, which are yearling, and even one or two of the 2-year-old trout that were more like 12 inches long. So having that habitat, and it created a scour pool, which is deeper water for him to hide in, was just a win-win-win. So woody cover is something we got to get more of in the Boise River. This top photo was taken up at the Diane Moore Nature Center, and you can just see all the little trout fry that are hiding and minnows that are hiding in this wood, and are able to dart away from a merganser or other birds that are trying to hunt. Speaking, one more before the Diane Moore Nature Center. So this graphic I grabbed out of the Bren guide. It talks about what does it mean to be channelized. Over time, you know, the river on the left, you know, they braid, they become, they jump around, they become curvy, which they like to call sinuous or sinuosity, and that's very healthy river. But on a river below a dam, over time, they end up becoming deep and just one deep long channel, which isn't very good for trout populations. If we look at the Fish and Game fry census, side channels have 10 times as many trout fry as the main river. The big main river is just not a easy place for a fry to survive. It's big currents with a lot of predators, right? And these side channels have 10 times the survival rate. This is a side channel sign that we put up at the Diane Moore Nature Center in the last year, where they've done a side channel restoration, which I think is my next slide. Yeah. Oh no, this is an example of a channelization example that happened recently. This is behind Expo Idaho, the old LeBois racetrack, if those who lived here long enough to see that. On the right, you can see after Snowmageddon, the river does not enter this side channel during the winter. Pre-Snowmageddon, on the left, you can see that during the winter, this side channel had water all winter long. So what happens in these below dams is really high river levels like Snowmageddon will move big cobble. We're talking stuff that's you know, grapefruit to volleyball size, and it will clog the entries to these side channels. They still flow during the summer, but that mound is blocking it off from flowing in the winter. It plugs it. The way Mother Nature normally works is on successive years, she would put additional force down the river to help clear a path again. But because of the reservoirs, we catch that water upstream, and we never have anything that cleans that artery back out. And so the artery becomes clogged and it doesn't flow. So we've identified this side channel, which there's 2 side channels. It's about a mile of spawning and rearing habitat that's been lost. It runs during the summer, just not during the winter, which means there's no place for baby fish to overwinter. There's no place for brown trout to spawn. So we're working with IDFG. They're working with City of Boise and Garden City, and we're trying to excavate the entries to those and do some improvements in those side channels to get them flowing again. But that's a classic example of channelization below a dam. And if nobody's paying attention, pretty soon you don't have anything but that main channel anymore, right? One side channel improvement that's happened recently is up at the Diane Moore Nature Center, which is a couple miles below Lucky Peak. They, the Intermountain Bird Observatory, BSU, has been doing some habitat improvements there for fish and birds and wildlife. And they found some old documented photographs that showed that there used to be 2 channels in this area, and they were able to do a river channel restoration. And so they restored about a half a mile of a side channel. They dug it out. It's flowing now, and they've got a lot of wood in there. We've just finished our first full spawning and rearing cycle on that. Several BVFF volunteers snorkeled it this summer to check the baby trout fry population, and we counted over 2,500 trout fry. Which is just amazing number there. And with the amount of wood and this construction of the side channel, we hope there'll be good survival. So we think that this area's got a growing wild trout population. We're really excited to be involved with the activity. We didn't do any of the work there. We're helping with other things, but it was a great restored side channel that we hope to see replicated in other areas, right? And this is the area when I did the side channel, when I showed the stocking, this area is not stocked regularly by Fish and Game. I think in the last 30 years, they put rainbow trout in there 5 times, and not very many at that. It's usually if they just have some surplus trout. So all of the rainbow trout that are up there are really wild, right? So because of that, BVFF is making a proposal to Idaho Fish and Game. Fish and Game every 5 years or so has an open public input period where they ask the public for suggestions on fishing regulation changes. So we're asking them to consider managing that as a trophy trout fishery, which means they get to decide the regs, but it essentially would mean they would put a size and bag limits to help increase the average size of fish in that range and that reach from the New York Canal diversion downstream to Barber Dam. Most likely be something like the South Fork to Boise, 2 fish over 20. Possibly closing it in the spring for spawning. It would be up to them what the exact regulations. It would not become fly fishing only. It would not become catch and release. This is about trying to improve the average wild trout size in that stretch so that we have a place to go for trophy trout. We'll be putting out an angler survey to get feedback here in the next month or so, and I'll send it on to you ladies. We'd love to get your feedback. We're looking for 2 things. One is we want to make sure as a club before we propose it that we understand the angling community's thoughts on it. And if they don't support it, we wouldn't want to propose it. Second is if there is good support, we would like Fish and Game to see that there's good support. It's an incredibly difficult thing to get Fish and Game to change regulations, especially in a stretch of river like the Boise. It's possible, maybe a 50-50 shot that they'll accept this proposal. We'll see. Any questions from you on what this proposal is or why it's in place? I'd love to hear your girls' thoughts on if you think it's warranted, if you fished the stretch, if you have any experience in them, what you think is important about it. Well, you're all on mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry. I think it's a good proposal. I think whatever we can do to help for future generations and for better fisheries is, I think important to work on. And if we don't do it now, who's going to do it in the future?
I
Anyway,
agree.
that's-
Support all those babies that are hoping to survive the winter that you just found with all that in that Woody side channel. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, again, there's the table of stocking that you can see of how many trout were stocked. And if the public wants to keep trout, we're not against that. Just go someplace where they've been stocked. Why go pull on the wild trout population and give people who want to pursue wild, large rainbow trout a chance to do it close to town?
Roy, why do you think Fish and Game would be opposed to this proposal?
That's a great question. And I have talked with Art Butts and others from Fish and Game. And the primary reason is they strive for regulations simplicity. They would like to be able to, because when regulations get complex, people have trouble interpreting them correctly. So they would like to say the entire Boise River below Lucky Peak is all the same. You can fish it year round and keep 6 fish. That's kind of what they would like to do. That makes it simple and easy. So that's their biggest reason. The second is, if we were to try and make an argument that harvest was impacting the population, we would have to prove that. And we're trying hard not to say that the harvest is impacting it. We're trying to say we would like to see more larger fish there, which is part of their fisheries management plan, to have trophy trout regions. And so we're trying to play into that part of their strategy, as well as point out that it would be a feather in the city of Boise's cap to say they have a trophy trout fishery here for attracting visitors. So that's my feedback from talking with Fish and Game.
Well, is there a way, since there's so many more anglers now, not just fly fishers, but anglers in general, and people wanting to harvest fish?
Yeah.
Could you change the regulations? Because I know a lot of city ponds and stuff has changed from keeping 6 fish to only keeping 2 fish. Could just make that a general rule, just a 2-day of fish limit?
Are you talking on this stretch, Barbara? Are you talking about the whole river?
Well, like you said, Fish and Game goes, oh, well, we want to make it simple. So 6 fish limit, and instead of breaking it up and protecting this side, but not that side, because they want simplicity. Okay, well, make it simplicity, change the regs to 2. You can only harvest 2 a day.
Yeah, to do that, there would have to be data to show that the population has decreased over time and is staying down. And they are doing some population electrofishing censuses once every 3 years, and they are down right now. But it's not until that fishery continues to drop over a period of multiple censuses. So it's going to be 6 to 9 years before they would say, oh, we need to make a change. So we don't have data that says that there would be benefit from doing that. And so we would not be smart to make that proposal.
Yeah, well, it just seems that like since the pandemic, when people couldn't go shopping and couldn't travel, everybody started fishing. And they've discovered that they really like fishing. So now everywhere you go, fishing is crowded on the weekends and stuff like that. And so if you look at the extra amount of people moving to Idaho and fishing in Idaho and harvesting fish in Idaho, is Fish and Game keeping up with that demand and stocking that many more? Or should we lower the amount that people are allowed to keep?
I think that's a very good question. And when Fish and Game opens for public comment, I would encourage you ladies to individually look for things that you want to say. That might be a good individual one, but as a club, you might have something you want to put in. You've noticed this amount of increase in the fishing population, people out fishing, and this is how your experience has changed. I think those are excellent things for the club to put to the Fish and Game as well as individuals. This is the one that BVFF has, to be honest, the BVFF said, hey, we'd like to have a fly fishing only stretch of the south on the Boise River in town. And I said, that's not going to happen. You'll get laughed out of the state if you propose that. And so that was 5 years ago. And in the meantime, we started working up here at the Diamore Nature Center and saw how good the population of wild trout was doing there. And from that, decided, let's look and see if we can make this a trophy trout stretch, which would push it in the direction of catch and release, because a lot of people, if they can't keep a fish, they don't want to fish there. And that's fine.
true.
Right? So it somewhat fits into the fisheries management plan that Fish and Game already has. So Fish and Game, they're fairly hard to influence. When I say I give this a 50-50 shot, I think I'm being optimistic that they will take this proposal. Maybe they'll take it in 5 more years. Maybe they won't. I can say that they are aware that the fish population in the Boise River is down compared to 3 years ago. They don't know why, and they don't know if it is a trend or a blurb or a measurement difference. So they're watching it, but the granularity of measurement is pretty low. Once every 3 years.
So Troy,
Yeah.
when is this open public input period start?
Yeah, Lisa, great question. It hasn't been announced yet. Talking with Art, he expects to push something out in March. And so our club will probably put their survey out in late February, early March to coincide with that. We're not trying to compete with their survey. We're just trying to say that, hey, this survey is going on and this is what we'd want. Please tell us what you think. Time frame. And so I'm trying to time it about the same. And I think it'll stay open for a month or two. It all depends. Sometimes they stay open for months, sometimes it's weeks. It's kind of funny. So March.
Do you have a sense of how much influence the public has over their decision making? I mean, if there's a slew of people, individuals and groups who, are requesting or asking questions about, one particular thing like this proposal, would they be more apt to sway towards that direction?
I think I'm gonna try to take the high road and say I think that Fish and Game does care what the public wants, and they, for example, they made the Dick Knox Pond last time a trophy bass fishery based on public input, right? So they do make changes. They are very cautious about how they apply new regulations, and they don't want something they're going to have to live with forever. That makes it complicated. I do think they care about the public's input. I also think
Right.
that they often care more about revenue, and they're going to make decisions based on how many licenses that might change sales wise, because they have to raise revenue to make themselves run.
Troy, do you think the increased rafters impacts the amount of fish in the river?
I think, Connie, the number of rafters impact the amount of trash in the river for sure. I don't know that they have any impact on the population other than negligence of pollution, but water quality issues such as city and agriculture runoff are much worse than all the flip-flops that end up in the river. So I don't think the rafters are impacting the trout habitat. Now, what I'm really concerned about, and so is Fish and Game, is that so this section of river from Barber to Ann Morrison is completely denuded of wood, which means that it's hard for trout fry to survive in that stretch. And we take it out so that people can get drunk and float down the river on their pink unicorns, right? And there are proposals to expand that stretch further downstream all the way to Glenwood Bridge, which would mean denuding the river of more and more wood. And that, I believe, is a significant negative impact on the trout population. So that's kind of an indirect implication of floaters, but if they expand the floater reach for tubers particularly, that means less wood, which means less trout. Great conversation pieces.
So how-
I'd encourage you all to talk amongst yourself about is there something that you think as a group that you want to set a position on, or just at least encourage your individuals to give input. As fishermen, it's important.
Yes. So is there a way that we could like protest them lengthening the river for floating, like all the way to Glenwood? Say like, go to them and say, no, we don't want you to take any more habitat away from the fish. People can just float again if they want to go further. They
Yeah,
don't have
so
to
the
float further, they can
proposals
go again.
the proposals there are being driven by Boise Parks and Rec, not Fish and Game, Boise Parks and
Oh.
Rec. They are in the process of doing a new Boise River master plan that tries to balance out all the demand for users on the river as well as fishing as nature. They've taken initial public input. They have not published their new plan yet. When that comes out, then that's the opportunity for us if there is a proposal to expand the floater zone. So we had an early opportunity to give input. Boise Valley Fly Fishers and some others gave input about the importance of maintaining fish habitat through the river system. So we'll see where they end up, and sometime probably this summer they're going to try to roll out the new master plan, and we'll have to see what they say, and then and we may end up having to organize against expanding the tuber zone.
Yeah, because how much revenue do tubers provide to Fish and Game or to Parks and Rec?
A lot.
They
Yeah,
do?
they have
They have
pretty big numbers saying how much floaters bring in for revenue. Now, fishermen do as well, but I think the best thing they could do for the floaters would be to create a secondary zone down around Star Middleton where the water's warmer and there's not as good a trout habitat, so that you don't have all the congestion of everybody in the same zone. If you want more floaters, create a secondary floater zone out of the best trout habitat. Because to be honest, from Barber Park down to Ann Morrison, that's some of the best trout habitat water in the whole river, right? And we can't fish it during the summer unless you go out first thing in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Troy, what's the public comment opening? What's the window for comment on that? Do you know?
Alex, I believe talking with Fish and Game at the expo, it's going to be March. Your club can contact Art Butts from the Southwest. He's the Southwest Regional Fisheries Manager. If you don't have his contact info, I can give it to you. And he will then put you on the list to be notified when it comes out in case you don't see it.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I expect it'll be March. I don't know how long it'll be open. I think we'll get at least 4 weeks, probably 8, maybe as many as 12 weeks.
Troy, who's the contact person again?
Art, A-R-T, Butts, B-U-T-T-S. And let's see. There is his contact information on the screen. You get that?
All right.
Art.butts at idfg at idaho.gov. Call him. He gets a lot of emails. Art's a gruff guy. He's got a heart of gold. He's a really good Idahoan. You call and talk to him, and that's the best thing to do. And just tell him you're interested in when the public input session is.
All
right. And he'll put you on a list. And if there's something you are interested in at that time, he'll talk to you about it. I
Okay.
like Art.
Awesome. Thank you.
He's been a very great partner to the club.
Cool, thank you.
Troy, I have a question about this lady's name that's attached to that section of the river. Did she donate land or was there specific purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of our parks, right, are named after the matriarch, right? Ann Morrison, Julie Davis, Catherine Albertson, right? So they're all named after the matriarchs. If you've been in Boise fly fishing very long, you probably recognize the name Winston Moore.
Yes.
Diane Moore is his wife.
Okay. I didn't know if she specifically had her name attached because of fishing. That's my inquiry.
The area is not a fishing area. The Winston Moore Foundation helps fund activities up there. And so it's been named after the Diane Moore Nature Center. It's going to be, if you haven't been there, I highly recommend going and walking it. It's the bird Intermountain Bird Observatory does bird banding there for songbirds, for hummingbirds, and is actively turning that into what's going to be a great place to take kids to learn about nature right in town, right? It's going to be a great, it already is, but it's still under development, a nature center where people can go learn about wildlife, fish, birds, nature.
I was hoping she had some kind of a directive to make it regarding fishing.
I don't believe so. I mean, Winston is a legend for fishing in the valley, but this park was not made with fishing in mind per se, although it's obviously very important because they did this work to restore this side channel.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
You bet. Let's see. Any other questions? I've shown you the local waters page. It's a great resource for checking flows and water temps. If you go onto our webpage under the conservation, there's a conservation blog that I write monthly. I'll write something in there that's about our projects. There'll be this trout angler survey that I mentioned, and I'll send it out to you to help give feedback on what you think. I've been talking about the bogometer off and on. You can find them only at dryflyinnovations.com. Nate Bremley helped me put it together based off of my original tool. And so they're the only place that sells them. They're a handy chart. I think they're $4. I get a buck of that. That's not why I'm pushing it. I think it's a great tool to have along to match the hatch. So are there other questions about tailwaters?
No, none. Thank you. This was really comprehensive. I learned a lot. I've only been in Boise a couple of years and it's just been wonderful.
Great. Well, I'm sure there was a lot here, and hopefully everybody got something.
Troy, I just wanted to thank you for pointing our members who joined us tonight to the Boise Valley Fly Fishers website, because it's chock full of great tools for the fishing community. The local waters page that you showed us, all the conservation efforts and there's a great detail. It goes into great detail about what your club is doing in the gravel augmentation and the fish counting and the different waters. And we're very fortunate to have this club driving all of these programs for the entire community. So I just wanted to thank you for that and pointing those out to us.
Yeah, the web pages could always be improved, but it's got some good info, and we've got a reasonable Facebook group page that's open to anybody. So we'd love to have any of you ladies follow that, and encourage you to help us with our Fill the Net program, although you're better than many of our members. And we'll have another river cleanup this spring, and we'll talk about it on that, and we always love having you on those. Again, thanks for all your support of our projects.
You're welcome.
Troy, do you want to mention what Fill the Net is to the new members?
Yes, that's a great thing. So there's a member, Ezekiel Willard, of the club, and he started a website or a Facebook group page called Fill the Net. And his motto was many hands make light work. And he encouraged people to pick up some trash in their net after they were done fishing during the day. And the club liked that and picked it up. And we encourage our members at the end of the fishing day to pick up some trash and just take it out in your net. We're not trying to take your whole fishing trip and pick up bags of trash, because you could spend your whole life doing it and never fish again. It's just when you're done fishing and you're headed back to the truck, and you walk by a beer can along the road, or a flip-flop in the river, whatever it is, throw it in your net and carry it out. We like to take a photo of it and post it on our Facebook page, because in order to lead by example, somebody's got to see you do it. And there are a lot of new people to the valley that don't know how we roll here, that we take care of our resources and leave them better than we found it. And so this is a way to show people that that stuff isn't just being picked up by, they think there's somebody hired who comes out and picks up after them, somebody named your mama, I guess. So this is a way for us to help show that we lead by example. So I encourage you not only to pick it up, but make it visible that you did it. So George Butts monitors posts, and he'll send you a thank you. And this year we sent everybody a car wash. Thanks to the ladies who helped this year. Did you get your car washes?
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you for that, helping us keep the river clean, and we hope you get a little cleaner car because of it as well. But that's in essence what Fill the Net is. It's also, Connie, a way to teach river stewardship on how to take care of something. So if you pick up trash, you're much less likely to throw trash. So it's got a lot of facets to it that is good for the club, right? But in essence, we just encourage you, when you're done fishing and you're headed out and you walk by a piece of trash, don't walk by it. Just pick it up, throw it in your net, and haul it out.
You can come in.
Other
Troy,
questions?
this was amazing. I think my head is going to explode. I just want to let everybody know that we have recorded the presentation. We'll be putting it on our club YouTube page, and we'll let you know when that's posted. So absolutely amazing. Thank you, Troy.
Yeah, I know it's a bit much. I can't help myself. I'm sorry.
It's I'll watch it 3 times, and then most of it will settle in my brain.
Yeah, it's wonderful information. Thank you very much for all the effort.
You're
And
welcome,
for
Lisa.
spending some time with us tonight, Troy.
Yep, I'm sorry we weren't there in person, because I always like chatting with you ladies, but next time.
Yes,
Next time.
indeed.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you,
Nice to see
Troy.
you, particularly you